ABC News Election 72 continues with Howard K. Smith and Harry Reasoner. Brought to you by J.C. Penney. Tomorrow morning, our 1,700 stores and our catalog will be waiting to help you find what you're looking for.
Well, in the East, just at 7:30, something like 2% of America's precincts have reported in the presidential race. And Richard Nixon is leading with 67% against 32% for George McGovern. A vote of over about 1,100,000 to Mr. McGovern's 533,000. A small 3% of the precincts now. A small amount, but nothing so far to indicate anything different from what was expected by pre-election surveys. ABC News has just added a fourth state to the states we project will be in President Nixon's column when all the votes are in, Georgia, with 12 electoral votes, bringing his total up a little bit. Howard?
If the president's total is now 41 electoral votes, it may be worthwhile looking at the board showing which states he has. President Nixon now has 41 electoral votes. McGovern so far has won none of those four states. I also have two more projected results in the Senate races. We have a state projection in the contest for control of the U.S. Senate. The state of Kentucky, John Sherman Cooper's seat, we project Democrat Walter Huddleston, the winner of election to the United States Senate from Kentucky over former Governor Louis B. Nunn, the Republican. Huddleston defeats Nunn in Kentucky. And this one comes as no surprise, a projection in the contest for control of the Senate from Mississippi. In the Senate race in the state of Mississippi, we project Democrat James O. Eastland elected to Mississippi's Senate seat, which he holds already.
The states so far that President Nixon has been credited with by ABC News as projected victories are not surprises, but they are interesting because in each case he's been running at least as close as the polls said he would, at least as far ahead, and probably a good deal higher. Indiana, a traditional Republican state when it comes to voting for the president. Kentucky, which has been turning Republican. Mississippi with 7 electoral votes, and Georgia, which are Nixon country this year, just as they were Wallace country in 1968. And in each case, because of the absence of George Wallace, the Nixon vote is a good deal higher. In Kentucky, with 48% of the precincts reported, he's getting 65% of the votes. In 1968, he took it, but with only 43%. Mr. Humphrey behind him with 37%, and George Wallace taking the 18% that apparently went almost entirely to him this time. We also have one gubernatorial projection in Indiana, which went Republican in the presidential race. It has also elected a Republican governor, Otis Bowen. Governor Edgar Whitcomb there could not succeed himself, also a Republican, so far no change in the national lineup of governors. Some of the states that we have no results on, definitive enough to project, are still being very interesting. In Ohio, according to the early reports from ABC's key precincts, the precincts that should show how Ohio is going through the evening, Mr. Nixon is running very well, and he's running very well generally, with no particular pad in the areas which are traditionally Republican. And in Florida, Mr. Nixon is far ahead statewide, even leading substantially in Dade County, the area around Miami where Senator McGovern would be believed to have his major strength.
Harry, we have a projected result in the contest for control of the U.S. Senate, this time from Georgia. In the Senate race in the state of Georgia, we project Democrat Sam Nunn, the victor, for Georgia's seat in the United States Senate over Republican Congressman Fletcher Thompson. Though only 1% of the votes are in, that is our projection that Nunn has won. The Democrats have now won 3 Senate seats. The Republicans have so far won none.
And we'll have more on Election 72 in just a moment.
If you're looking for a way to say who you are for the holidays, we'll help you show who you are. So much fun to do when you show what you know is really you.
Sew up a sensation this holiday season with J.C. Penney's big, beautiful collection of holiday fabrics. You'll find the most stunning prints priced from just $2.99 a yard to sew what you know is you.
We know what you're looking for. We know what you're looking for.
At JCPenney, we like to keep your hands out of trouble. That's why we've built a lot of safeguards into this 7¼ inch circular saw. A lever up top to work the blade guard to keep your fingers away from the blade. A guard that keeps blade exposure above the work to a minimum. And a security switch that helps prevent accidental startups. All for only $49.99. Only at JCPenney. We're doing everything we can to keep your hands out of trouble.
Well, at 7:36 in the East, 3% of the precincts in the United States, President Nixon holding a 67 to 32% lead. President Nixon has won 4 states, Indiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Georgia. The Senate and the race for the governor is going about so far as expected. What do you say, Howard?
Yes, Harry, a while ago we were talking about polls. I've looked up the 1948 results of the polls. I'm sure he won't like my reminding the world of it, but Elmo Roper's organization was 19% off in 1948, and George Gallup was off 9% in 1948.
Mr. Gallup, in his current releases, makes it look like it was about 5 or 6%.
Well, it was 5 or 6%, but then from Truman victory, but then Truman won by the additional percent that made it 9%, so it was pretty bad. But they have improved their methods. I wonder how much effect they have on the voters.
Well, the old question is whether they start a stampede or whether they merely catch on the tails of the stampede. We have Tully Plesser standing by in Providence, Rhode Island, with ABC News correspondent Lem Tucker. Tully is an experienced pollster, and like most pollsters, I think they probably make their living finding out things about how people think between elections, so they are not real politicians. Would that be a fair statement?
Say that's partly fair.
Mr. Plesser, a few moments ago, you were talking about the reverse coattail effect.
Wait, I got it.
The president. You want to go into that some more?
Well, one of the things that seems to be happening in states all across the country is that where large numbers of voters find themselves voting for the Republican presidential candidate for the first time, they are really boomeranging and getting behind the Democratic candidates in the Senate races and in the gubernatorial races. It's almost as if they feel that there's some penance due. They have to make up for the fact that they're voting Republican, and so they're getting back into their regular organizational voting and voting Democrat in the other races. We see it already in the Georgia contest and in the Kentucky contest, where the president is running far ahead of Senator McGovern, and yet the opposite is the outcome in the Senate races. That is, above average vote for the Democratic candidates.
So what you're saying is some of those people below the line of president might do better if George McGovern did better in their states.
We've heard that comment from several candidates, that is, Republicans who said they wished that Senator McGovern would do a little better so that there'd be fewer people having to reverse and vote Democratic after voting for President Nixon. In the interviewing that we've done for quite a while now, it's become a very painful process for a lot of voters all across the country who find that while they would prefer to favor Democratic candidates and they consider themselves Democrats, they have to vote for Nixon in this election and then find themselves getting back into line in those other races.
You've been on the phone to the White House earlier this evening. What did you find out there?
Well, with a certain amount of guarded comment, I would say that the above-average turnout seems to be favorable to the president in this race. That is, that in many states, including Alabama, larger numbers of voters turning out at the polls than most people had expected, and this seems to be benefiting the president in those races.
Is the White House surprised at this reverse coattail effect?
I would doubt it. I think that the professional polling people all over the country have been measuring this particular idea for several months now. That is, seeing contests that should have been really in favor of Republican Senate candidates and gubernatorial candidates running neck and neck right to the wire. And the reason for it, the only explanation for it we see so far, is it's this boomerang effect or the lack of a Nixon coattail.
Mr. Plesser, are you still sticking by your earlier polls about what's going to happen in the presidential race tonight?
I am still sticking to my earlier comments about what's going to happen. That's right.
A Nixon landslide?
If we call 60-40 a landslide, yes, we have not pulled away from that number.
Thank you. Tully Plesser here in Rhode Island. This is Lem Tucker, and now back to Harry Reasoner.
Thank you, Lem. A pollster sticking by his predictions and with nothing to indicate so far that he shouldn't. We'll have more on Election 72 in just a moment.
Our coverage of Election 72 will continue after this message from Ford.
This is Dr. E.L. Gibson, Enterprise, Alabama, 83 years old, still practicing medicine. He drives a Ford Pinto, but that's not surprising. Doc Gibson started out in a rugged, reliable Ford car over half a century ago.
First car I owned was a Ford Model T, like that one there. Used it to make my house calls. That car took some licking, but it got me where I had to get.
It's that same kind of car we had in mind when we built today's Ford Pinto, to stand up to rough roads, to take the worry out of the mud. We built Ford Pinto to be a rugged, reliable, basic car, just like the one Doc Gibson started out with 60 years ago. When you get back to basics, you get back to Ford. Pinto for 73 at your Ford dealers.
Well, to sum up, there have been 3 projected Senate results so far in the 33 Senate contest tonight. In Georgia, Sam Nunn, the Democrat, won a seat already held by the Democrats from Georgia. In Mississippi, James Eastland, the Democrat, won a seat already held by him, a Democrat in Mississippi. But in Kentucky, there's been a turnaround. Walter Huddleston, a Democrat, has won a seat that was held by the Republican John Sherman Cooper. He has defeated Cooper's successor, Louis B. Nunn. So far, it's a net gain of 1 for the Democrats in the Senate races, and the Republicans are rather far from that net gain of 5 seats they were hoping for to control the Senate.
One of the things that you have to do at about this time of the evening is to look ahead. The votes that we've had so far are going absolutely according to the polls, or even weighting a little heavier on the side of the polls. But the big states, the states that will make the decision through the night, have not yet come in, and they won't come in for a while. And we can see that by looking at the boards. For instance, if you look at the presidential race in the state of Massachusetts, so far, absolutely nothing in Massachusetts, and there won't be for a while because their polls have not closed. If you look at the presidential race in the state of Michigan, which is one of the industrial states where George McGovern's people believe that he has a serious chance of taking it. In the presidential race in the state of Michigan, there are a total of 102 votes in, and even though they are running almost 4-1 for Mr. Nixon, I don't suppose that even Tully Plesser would make a prediction on that basis. If you look at Ohio, you have a little more information. In the presidential race in Ohio, it had been conceded to Mr. Nixon in the polls, but there was enough concern so that he made one of his rare visits to a state to go out there. He's now running ahead with 4% of the precincts in, about 2-1, and furthermore, on the basis of ABC's key precincts in Ohio, he's doing very well all the way across.
Harry, we have Frank Mankiewicz in the McGovern headquarters in Washington, D.C., and correspondent Herb Kaplow with him. Herb, come in.
We also have Pierre Salinger with us. Pierre is head of the Citizens for McGovern Shriver, and Frank Mankiewicz is the national political director. Now, we have 4 projections that have shown Indiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Georgia going to President Nixon. What do you make of that, Mr. Mankiewicz?
Well, those are no surprise. Those are 4 states we assumed that Mr. Nixon would win. I think, as a matter of fact, the polls have yet to close in any of the states that we thought Senator McGovern would run strongly in or would win, except possibly Ohio, and I think there are probably too few votes there to do much with it.
We have some indications from what seem to be key precincts that President Nixon is doing well in those key Ohio precincts.
Well, I would imagine he is doing well in key Ohio precincts, but I think it's far too early to put that state in either column. But we'll wait and see. The polls are going to remain open an extra couple of hours in a few of the Ohio counties by court order earlier today. And as far as the other states are concerned, as I say, I think the polls are not even closed yet.
Mr. Salinger, which states are you looking for now, waiting to see some real ideas to what may be happening tonight?
Well, I think it's absolutely crucial for us to win New York, Illinois, California. And I think we'll be looking very hard at the New York results, the Massachusetts results, and Michigan results, which will be results which you'll be getting in the next hour. I think if we fail to carry New York, we obviously have a serious problem tonight. But I agree with Frank that among the states that have so far indicated they're going for Senator McGovern, there are no states in there that we really thought we had a real chance, and that the results from Ohio are too fragmentary to make a real decision.
Well, one of the early indications, again, on the basis of relatively little turnout so far, is that President Nixon seems to be holding up perhaps a little bit stronger than even the polls have indicated. Do you have any information on that, nationally?
I don't think we have any national trend to make any judgment on that, Herb. I'd be very surprised that anyone's daring at attempting that. You've got a couple of hours still to vote in California, where I understand we've got a bit of a hassle going on over whether you can vote if your affidavit isn't on file. The law seems pretty clear that you can, but I suppose that'll be ironed out there.
Can you in any way transfer what seems to have happened in the Kentucky Senate race where a Democrat won Senator Cooper, a Republican seat? Does that carry over at all?
Well, I was in Kentucky about a week ago, and the Democrats were quite confident that Mr. Huddleston would win the Senate race down there, even though they thought that George McGovern would lose the state by a substantial margin. I think you're going to find the Democrats holding their own across the country, maybe even doing a little better in the Senate races. We haven't got any real House totals yet, but I would think we'd do well in the House totals as well.
A lot of the Democratic congressional and gubernatorial nominees steered clear of any identification with Senator McGovern in this, and certainly those in the South and border states, by and large, did. Well, you say you are now waiting for the person...
Real stand-up guys, Herb, all of them.
Seems to have delighted you. What do you feel were the issues that were had most impact? Are you able to say yet? Do you have any feel this early in the evening?
I think it's very hard to assess that until you see how people are voting. I think a couple of days we might be able to sort that out a little better. You never really know what is animating voters, particularly until the votes are counted.
Let me just ask you one quick question, hopefully for a quick answer. You have the big 7 or 8 states, if you count Texas, in there. Can you very quickly tell me whether you know anything about them yet?
No, we have nothing on any of those states yet, and we're just waiting to see what happens in those states.
Mr. Makowitz, you are now flying out to Sioux Falls?
I'll be leaving very soon, yeah.
Why are you making such a hurried flight? Nobody's chasing you, I trust.
All flights in a jet are hurried.
Well, I mean, why is this your own jet leaving right now?
Well, because polls are either closed or nearly closed, and most of the states we're concerned about, the problems are resolved one way or the other. We've made a decision to file lawsuits, not to file. It's a question of counting now. And
have you made any decisions about lawsuits?
Well, there have been a number, and we've been successful in a number of them in keeping the polls open. I just heard, for example, the polls in Detroit will be open an extra 2 hours tonight because...
Is there any widespread irregularity?
There is scattered irregularity that seems to be assuming a pattern, yeah. But we've been fairly successful, I think, in overcoming it.
Well, thank you. I think we've given an unintended aura of mystery to your trip to Sioux Falls. Frank Makowitz and Pierre Salinger, both officials of the McGovern-Shriver attempt to win the presidency and vice presidency. That's the story from the McGovern-Shriver headquarters.
We have a projected result that Capello's 2 guests will not like. We have a state projection in the presidential election. In the presidential election in the state of Illinois, President Nixon is projected winner of Illinois' 26 electoral votes, the biggest individual prize of the night so far. To repeat, Nixon carries Illinois. In the Senate race in Illinois, we also have a projected result. In the Senate race in Illinois, we project Republican Charles Percy will retain his seat in his contest against Congressman Roman Puchinsky, Democrat. Percy beats Puchinsky.
Along with the result in Illinois, which is a surprise and is not a surprise, but is one of the major states that McGovern had hoped for reversal of the polls in, we have one of the certain states, South Carolina, is now projected to be in the Nixon column with its 8 electoral votes, giving President Nixon so far now 75 electoral votes on his way to the 270, and with none so far for Senator McGovern.
Harry, let's take a look at the recap board for the electoral vote, which is the one that counts. Popular vote is popular, but electoral vote counts. President Nixon now has 75 electoral votes so far. Senator McGovern has nothing. President Nixon needs, in other words, 195 more electoral votes to win. I have another projection in a contest for control of the U.S. Senate race in the state of South Carolina. Strom Thurmond wins election to South Carolina's seat in the U.S. Senate, re-election to it over Eugene Nick Ziegler, the Democratic candidate.
How startled are you by that, Howard? Not
at all. A little. You know, Ziegler was picking up black votes, and he got a George Wallace endorsement, so I thought he might do better than that.
don't think, however, we would outlive Strom Thurmond in the U.S. Senate.
We have a projection in the presidential election. Nixon is projected winner of Virginia's 12 electoral votes. Nixon carries Virginia as he did in 60, as he did in 1968. That is no surprise, but that adds to his total.
And we'll have more on Election 72 in just a moment.
Princess, I've come to grant you a wish.
One measly wish? Okay, Big Spender, the J.C. Penney catalog. And I want these flowered sheets.
Now you have your pretty J.C. Penney no-iron decorator sheets. Goodbye.
Not so fast. Now I want a tennis...
It's all in the J.C. Penney catalog. We know what you're looking for.
This is my husband. Doesn't look like much, does he? But wait. See what he's got there? One of his J.C.Penney knit dress shirts for only $8. What he's always wanted. Comfortable. And what I've always wanted. No ironing. Watch. Every morning a different pattern, but every morning the same thing. It's coming. It's what I look for every morning. It's Mr. Dynamite.
It's the J.C. Penney knit dress shirt. Only $8, only at J.C. Penney. We know what you're looking for.
Getting on toward 8 o'clock in the east, and with the states whose polls have closed so far, ABC News has been able to project that Richard Nixon is the winner in 7 states. In popular vote in the presidency, 4% of the precincts in this country have now reported, and Mr. Nixon is holding a steady 67% to 32% for George McGovern, about 1,700,000 to 820,000. Only one of the states so far a real surprise, would you say, Howard? Not a surprise, really significant.
Matters, yes. Illinois with 26 electoral votes.
Mm-hmm. And all the other states, Indiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, Illinois, South Carolina, and Virginia, were expected. Mr. Nixon with 1,757,000 votes at the moment. Senator McGovern with 828,773. That's the national popular vote in a good many areas where there's very little popular vote yet recorded. Because of ABC's key precincts, ABC News has been able to project the winners, which is why we are now able to say that Richard Nixon has 87 electoral votes to none for George McGovern. It's so far not a surprising night, and not a good night for Frank Mankiewicz and Peter Salinger, we just saw on the TV.
More on Election 72 in just a moment.